Hi, Mr. Toby Oliver. Welcome to the
Hi.
podcast for Paradigm Unshifted. And for those who don't know him, he's the cinematographer of Get Out, an Academy Award-winning film. And welcome to the podcast, sir. It's a big honor
Thank you
for me.
very much.
Yeah.
Of course.
So,
I'm happy
how
to
did
be here.
how did your journey start to becoming a big cinematographer, and how did you dream of it? Like, did you aim for it, or did you plan to be a director or something, or did you end up becoming a director of photography? How did
hmm
that happen?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because initially I got interested in filmmaking or making videos when I was at school, at high
Yeah.
school. And I made some films on, Super 8 film and stuff like that. This is going back a bit in time. And then I wanted to go to film school because I wanted to be a director,
Wow.
right? I wanted to write and direct and make my own movies. And I went to film school with that in mind. And I made some films when I was there, and I learned about the whole range of filmmaking, not just directing, but writing, editing,
Wow.
cinematography, sound. We did everything, right?
Amazing.
And At the end of it, the whole process, I kind of realized, or I felt that I probably was better suited to being behind the camera rather than trying to direct.
Wow.
And I found myself gravitating, like moving towards the cinematography side.
Yeah.
I was the cinematographer for some other students for their films, and in the years just after. So I ended up moving towards cinematography, having kind of tried a bit of everything in that as a student. And so then I got a job at a like a camera rental house,
Wow.
in Australia, where they have the equipment and the gear, and I
Amazing.
learned a lot about that, and that was how I got more technical skills, and then I sort of was on my journey, on my road towards becoming a cinematographer. But you start off, very small. You're
Yeah.
shooting short films or maybe music videos and all of those kind of corporate videos, all those kind of small projects was how I started out, like many people. Same story.
Wow.
And it takes quite a few years
Quite a few
before
years.
you get a chance to maybe shoot a feature film, maybe low budget. And I had that opportunity a few years after I went to film school. And then from there, you keep at it. It takes lots of dedication over many years to be a cinematographer, I think.
Such an inspiring story, sir. And you started with film, or did you like start with digital filmmaking?
Well, back when I started, when I was at film school, it was actually like 1988. So
Okay.
in those days, in the 80s, we had there was
Yeah.
videotape, like
Okay.
cassette,
Yeah, VHS,
and film, and yeah, VHS or Umatic
VCR,
or
VCD, a lot of.
Betacam, with
Yeah.
those kind of tape formats.
Mm.
1-inch tape we had, but mostly, if you were a real filmmaker, you shot on
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
In the 80s, you shot on
Right.
16 millimeter or 35 millimeter.
35 millimeter. Yeah.
And so most of my student films were 16 millimeter film. And then my first couple of feature films were 16 millimeter. And I think it was my third movie,
Okay.
which was made in by now, this is the 90s.
Yeah.
And I shot on 35 millimeter film. So in the
Okay.
90s, we all shot on film as well. Digital didn't really happen until, a bit later on. So this
Wow.
was, and then I was using 35 millimeter film for a few years before digital came along,
Wow.
and then, as you know, we all switched to digital.
And it is always an emerging technology, right? Everything is like new, and we continuously get new versions of cameras and new formats and everything. Like, how do you cope up with it? Like, how do you continuously
Oh,
keep learning even at this point of time? Several camera companies are coming in and all that.
yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's not a problem because I think as cinematographers now we have such a huge range of options with technology, and there's perhaps never been a better time to be a cinematographer. You have so much available to you,
Right.
the tools. However, the downside, as you say, is that there is a new camera coming out, every 6 months, maybe, like a significant camera. And what we used to have in the old film days was the cameras didn't change. And maybe every few years there was a new film stock that would come out. And that was about it. So once you learnt it, you didn't have to worry about that changing. You could just maybe just think about the creative ideas. But these days, you've still got to think of the creative ideas, but the new equipment comes along every year or every 6 months. And you've kind of, if you think that's equipment or a camera system that you might want to use, then you have to learn about it. And you have to do your research, and you have to do testing. And you have to go through all the procedures to make sure that because as a cinematographer, you've got to know about it. You can't turn up on set with a camera that you know nothing about, And so most recently the change. And so when I started shooting digital, I moved into initially Sony HD cam still with the cassette with the tape, but HD. And then the Arri Alexa came along about 10 years ago. I started using the Arri Alexa. But more recently, there's now been the push for 4K, 4K original. So the original Arri Alexa was no good for that. So I had to learn new camera systems. So I have to learn the Sony, the Red, the whatever, to try and all the small cameras and so there's so many cameras out there. You still got to know about quite a few of them, because you don't know what you're going to need to use on your next project. You can't always use the same thing. It doesn't, those days are gone.
So, but it's like a very big dream for any cinematographer to have multiple cameras lined up in front of you along with lenses, right? So it's like you can experiment indefinitely with any sort of
you
system. You
could spend your whole life just testing cameras and playing with equipment, but sooner or later you have to actually decide, okay, well, now I've got to shoot the film or shoot the TV show. You're going to make a decision, and you'll say, okay, well, we're going to choose this camera, we're going to choose these lenses. I need to learn a bit more about the camera if I don't know much about it. I need to test the lenses to make sure they're what I need. And that's a process I go through for every project. There's a test period. And if it's a new camera, that'll be quite a lot of testing. If it's a camera that I know already, I don't have to test so much.
You are already acquainted with it.
That's right.
So another thing is like, how do you choose the scripts you are going to work on? Is like there a specific set of genre you are like acquainted to, or you look at a script and tells you, wow, I have got some visual challenges to do here. It's a lot of experimenting and I'm willing to do it. So how do you choose the scripts? Like, for example,
go on.
For example, Get Out. So how did you choose it? From the interviews I read about you, you weren't quite familiar with Jordan Peele's, humor background, that he was acquainted with Key and Peele. So how did that, attract you?
Well, that's a really good couple of questions, because choosing the script you're going to do is perhaps one of the most important decisions you make. It's more important than the decision of which camera to use or the lenses. What's way more important is which script and which director to work with, obviously, especially if you have some choices in front of you and you're not sure, okay, well, what, because it's, you do a movie, it's like a 4-month thing at least. So it's a big chunk of time. So really it's about the script has to be something that excites me as a story, even if it's a genre, like it might be a horror movie or it might be a comedy or it might be a thriller. They're the sort of 3 genres that I've done the most of. It has to be a well-written script that grabs your attention and takes you right through to the end, like a good story, right? With good characters. That's number 1. And the number 2 is who's the director, and in the case of what do I know about them? How do I think they'll take this script, which I might like? What's their interpretation going to be of the script? And so I will then look at maybe some films that the director has done before. In the case of Jordan Peele, hadn't directed any films before.
Yeah.
This Get Out was his very first film. So I watched, but I didn't know him, but I did watch his comedy skits on Comedy Central with the Key and Peele. Yeah. So I watched a whole lot of Key and Peele scripts, which gave me a sense about Jordan because he wrote a lot of those. And so that gave me a sense of what he's about. And I think I watched another movie that he'd done that he had written and he was acting in. No, Us came later. It was another one about it was a one with him, and it was more like a Key and Peele, like feature length type thing.
Oh.
But really then what it comes down to, you say, okay, I like the script, I've looked up the director, and the next step is simply the interview with the director.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just the director by themselves, and sometimes it's them with the producers as well, or a producer. And that these days, that kind of interview happens on Zoom, a bit like this, most of the time. And then that's your final chance to get to know the director a bit more, and also pitch your ideas for the movie, and also try and make a good, if you like the script and you'd like to do the movie, you want to make a good impression to the director, and that's your opportunity is that interview, and that's kind of it. You don't really get any other opportunity except, and that interview might be half an hour or an hour or something. That's about it. And it all kind of hinges on that, plus what they know about you as the DP. They
what have you read about
resume,
them?
They talk to other people about you, so they're doing their research as well as the way I'm doing my research. But really, that's how you make a decision. I have to make the first decision at the script stage, and if I'm reading a script, and if by the first, say, roughly 30 pages into the script, if it hasn't really grabbed me in some way or make me want to read more, then maybe it's you just put it down because it's not going to work for you. So I have to be, because I get sent quite a lot of scripts when I'm ready to work, and you have to be sometimes a bit brutal about the ones that it's no good. I can't spend all this time reading something and I'm probably not going to want to do. So you have to make that kind of
decisions.
Those kind of decisions and those kind of choices need to be made pretty early too in the process.
So let's talk about working with Jordan Peele. Say it's a first-time director and all. And so what is something that you look into in a director? What prerequisite knowledge should he have, how to communicate with you as a cinematographer? Should he be specific about lenses? Should he be specific about camera? Should he be specific about the focal length? Should he be specific about the, whatever terms there are? Because even I am into the direction department rather than cinematography, right? So how should a director communicate with a cinematographer?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when I first met Jordan, he'd never, like I said, first-time director, but he hadn't directed anything, not even a short film or not even a music video. I mean, he'd been on sets as an actor for sure, and he'd written, and he's a writer, but he didn't know, for example, he didn't know anything about lenses. So for him, if I talk about, I think, here's this box of lenses, because what I did in pre-production was I said, Jordan, because you haven't seen any of this equipment or worked with it as a director, you want to come to the rental house and we'll have a look at the cameras and we'll have a look at the lenses, and we can figure out what we want to use. And so he did. He came along, and so I'm talking to him about a box of prime lenses. We've got the 18, the 25, the 35, 75, 50, blah 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 blah. And he's like, he's sort of eyes glazing over. He just doesn't understand any of those numbers. He doesn't know that a 50 or 25 is going to be wider than a 75.
Right.
And then I said, okay, well, fair enough. I mean, he's never had to worry about it before this, right? And so then I brought out the boxes of the Ongina zoom lenses, the Optimo, the little zooms. And he said, we don't really have to worry about the focal length. We just we'll zoom in and out to get the shot. We just have to worry about the wide one and the medium one, okay? Or the long one. There's about 3 of them. And it's more simple. You've got those 3 choices, and then you can just find the shot. And he said, oh, yeah, that's what I want. And so he was like, And so that's how we ended up shooting Get Out on this, only on Angena zoom lenses. We had 4
Wow.
lenses altogether. We used no prime lenses.
Wow.
And it's not because Jordan didn't want to learn about that stuff. He just wanted to try and simplify part of that process in his head,
Right.
because he was pretty new to the game. And I was fine about that. I was excited to just shoot the whole thing on zoom lenses, and see how that worked. And I ended up shooting, like, I think 2 or 3 more films after Get Out using the same lenses, just because it ended up being a good way to work. So that communication from a director is important, the technical side, but if the director doesn't have any technical knowledge, so long as they know what they want dramatically, and they know how to talk to the actors, that's the most important thing. Because as a cinematographer, I can do the technical side, and I can fill in the blanks, fill in all the gaps, right? And help him decide, where's the best position for the cameras. And I helped Jordan a lot with that. But he had no problem talking to the actors. The actors loved him.
Yeah.
So
He has
knew
been an
that
actor
side of
himself,
it was,
right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly. He was already an actor. So it was, so from that side, it's really, that's what you really want the director to be able to do: communicate to the actors, communicate to the crew in a broad sense. If they don't know all the technical details, doesn't matter. That's as a cinematographer, it's your job to do that, to fill in.
So ultimately, you have to do something to bridge the gap of communication between the director and the cinematographer, and you have to come to the midpoint where both are clear with the vision that the director has, right? So that's what ultimately matters. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes,
So
that's right.
I have like 2 scenes I want to discuss about Get Out. So the first scene that like emotionally and visually gripped me, like Chris in the movie, is the conversation between Chris and Missy, where she's hypnotizing him for the first time. She is hypnotizing him for the first time, and if visually seeing, like me as a director, if I'm seeing, so you have shot it in a very unconventional way. For example, if we are shooting 2 characters, every camera movement is usually symmetrical with respect to time. But here, what I noticed is when Catherine Keener is talking, and the camera simply moves, but the camera is stationary on Daniel, right? But after the camera has stopped moving on Catherine, the camera moves afterwards on Daniel. So why choose this unconventional way? Because it surprisingly worked. Because people don't really do that, right? They either move cameras simultaneously towards the characters, or they don't. I will quote one example from Whiplash. So there's this breakup scene, and the camera moves very fast. One from away from the character and one towards the character, but they both move at the same time, right? So what made you choose this? What did you how did you make this unconventional decision? Was it your decision, or was it the director's decision, or was it a mix of both?
It's usually a mix of both, because we'll usually discuss how we're going to cover the scene. And with me and Jordan, we had a storyboard, and everything was kind of drawn in, but that doesn't always have all the camera moves. And we don't always stick to the storyboard exactly, although in Get Out, it was, fairly close. But the reason is, I think with horror movies and thrillers, or particularly horrors, you have a bit more leeway to move away from what's normal or what's comfortable or what's expected in terms of moving. Say you're saying, moving the camera into one character, moving into the other character at the same time. Because in a horror movie, what you're trying to create is a sense of unease. It might start, this scene in particular, it starts off, they're very friendly. She asks him to sit down. Oh, I'm just going to try talking to you. She starts doing the teacup, and she starts asking him questions. And then it starts getting a bit weird, and the anxiety sort of goes up, and we think something's kind of weird starting to happen. And so what we want to do with the camera is not be normal. We want to be uncomfortable. And
Oh,
so by having very static, straight shots on her, but having this creeping in on him,
right,
starts making it's creating a sense of unease in the audience because you don't
right,
quite know what's going to happen. Something's going to happen
right,
here.
right.
She's starting to hypnotize him, and we're not quite sure we don't know where that's going to lead to, but it's obviously
Yeah,
not going to be good. It's going to be
yeah,
bad. All right. So the job of the camera is, horror movie, and this is not just Get Out, this is, generally,
general.
is to
Yeah,
create a sense of unease for the audience. And that sometimes often means not shooting it the normal way, the expected way or the comfortable way. It's doing the opposite. And then, in that scene, we end with the scene with him looking straight down
yeah,
the barrel of the camera before he sinks into the
right,
couch. And I think there's a shot back on her also
right,
straight down the barrel when she gets up and closes his eyes. So you go in this, you start off the scene very conventionally, then it becomes this very unconventional thing by the end, which is exactly the point. And then he drops down into the
sunken
sunken
place.
place.
Wow,
That's
that's
right.
amazing. And in this scene, I
Mm.
noticed that there is some amount of moonlight that falls on Chris, and there is
Mm.
only one particular place where it falls on Catherine. That is a cup of tea that she's holding,
Mm.
right? So,
Mm.
is
Mm.
that of some metaphorical significance, or was it a conscious choice, or it just happened?
It's always a conscious choice that's more a lighting choice.
Yeah,
And in the case of that scene, it was just part of the lighting atmosphere for the
right,
room.
right,
And the room was meant to feel fairly normal and straightforward, but has a little bit of moonlight creeping in from outside because we just saw him outside in the moonlight
right,
in the scene
right,
before. And that little bit does spill onto the teacup. So you do get that little bit but that wasn't the point. That was just there as part of more of the atmosphere rather than trying to make too much of a metaphorical
right.
sort of anything.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm.
There's one more thing I wanted to ask, like in general, not about
Mm.
this scene. So I
Mm.
have a tendency to watch movies directly without watching the trailer. So I never
Mm.
knew what the theme was going to be, and this is sort of enjoyable because it gives me more amount of thrill, right? So
Yeah.
my question is like, who does the framing? Who decides the framing? Is it the director or the cinematographer? Because
The
uh,
framing of each shot, you mean?
each shot,
Yeah.
and what are
Mm-hmm.
the mise en scene? What is the mise en scene, right? So
Mm.
I, when I watched Get Out for the second time, I was able to notice a lot of things, like the paintings
Mm.
or photographs on the wall were all black and
Mm.
white, and they
Mm.
gave some
Mm.
amount of hint that this was going to be about race. And when I
Mm.
watched it for the
Mm.
first time, I never knew it
Mm.
was going to be race until the mid of the movie, right?
Mm.
Because there
Mm.
is only
Yeah.
one hint where the policeman asks Chris for his ID with
Yeah, that's
regards to
right.
his race. But that
Yeah.
is, I thought that is a very common thing that happens in movies and as well as in real life, but that never gave away the theme of the movie, right?
No,
So
that's right.
who does the framing and how was it done so beautifully?
Well, it's a little bit of a combination, and it does depend on the director cinematographer relationship,
Yeah,
and it can change with every movie.
yeah,
Some directors are very, very specific about the framing of the camera.
yeah.
Some directors operate the camera themselves because
Wow.
they just want to control that completely.
Right.
But most directors will leave the framing up to the exact framing will be up to the operator. And in the case
Yeah.
of Get Out, I was one of the operators. So, but the choice of the lens has a lot to do with the framing, obviously.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is where you put the camera in relation
Yeah.
to
The
where
character
the
and
actors
the
are,
scene. Yeah.
where the characters are, right? So you've got those three things. You've got where you put the camera, what lens is on the camera, and then the actual operating
Right.
of the
Right.
shot. And the director can sometimes be involved in all of those things, or maybe none of those things.
Okay.
So sometimes, depending on the experience of the director, they're not quite sure where to put the camera. They kind of
Okay.
know what the actors have got to do, but then when it comes to like, okay, where are we putting the camera? They'll look at me, and I've got to make a decision about.
That's
Okay,
where you
well,
fill
how
in.
about
Right.
we'll put it
Yeah.
here, and we'll put on a 25 mil, and we'll do a wide shot from here, and then or
Wow.
maybe we'll be on a dolly, and we'll do a little move. in the wide shot, and we'll end up over here, and then that's the end of the scene.
Right.
And in Get Out, it was a bit of a mixture. Some scenes, Jordan had a pretty strong idea about where he wanted the camera. And there were other scenes in Get Out too, where he didn't really know, especially scenes where there were a lot of people and stuff, because he wasn't really, directing's harder when there's more than one or two people in the scene, right? Wow. So in that situation, you know, as the cinematographer, like me, I've done many, many movies. You draw a bit on your experience. And you say, well, you know, we've got 10 people in this scene, or there's 5 people. I think we should start here, and then we'll move to that camera for the 2 shot. We'll move here for a single, then we'll have a shot that brings him in, and then blah, blah, blah. And so you work out the coverage of the scene. Sometimes if the director isn't sure, then I'll come up with the coverage. Sometimes the director is very clear, and you work on it together. Sometimes they're super clear and they say, that's the shot I need. That's all I want. And sometimes I'll say, oh, what about some extra coverage of that? And sometimes they'll go, no, won't use it. Because ultimately the director makes the decision on what shots in the edit will get used. Like they're going to work with their editor, and I have nothing to do with that. All I can do is gather all the ingredients. They're going to actually make the cake later on. So,
Yeah. So, again, about the decision making, how do you decide the color palettes? Like there are films, like including Get Out, there are scenes which don't give the exact tone and visual of a horror film, right? Like the Armitage House. So it was like a very romantic film or something. Even when Chris and Rose are like talking in front of the lake or something, and they're like at the end of the scene, it didn't give a very horror scene film, right? So
that's right.
How do you like decide what colors to use, how the look and feel should be?
Well, it's something that you usually decide, or you at least have some ideas about that very early in pre-production. And in fact, often when I'll do that interview, when I do the interview to try and get the job, way back at the beginning, I'll have a deck, a lookbook, which will have examples of other films or photographs or other references that will show some of the color palette that I'm thinking, well, this is maybe what we could have, what the direction we should go. With Get Out, and this is something that me and Jordan talked about on that first interview, and that interview was only on the phone. That's how I got the job. Was we talked about the beginning, that whole first section of the film leading up to the Armitage House being very natural, very normal. Very natural, maybe a hint of nice lighting and romantic feel, or maybe a bit of indie film when he's at his house or whatever. Not horror movie. We didn't want any kind of horror movie look or horror movie feel for the first part of the movie, maybe the first third of the movie at all. And that's something that we both agreed on. We thought, this has got to look really natural, and then the horror comes into it later when people realize, when the audience realizes what's going on, then we start playing with all those horror techniques of lighting, camera. But at the beginning, it was supposed to look very normal, like a nice film. And we agreed on that from the beginning, and that's how we ended up shooting it. That was very deliberate. That it was done. So
it also, the cinematography basically created a sense of deception for the audience, right? So 1 second they are like, wow, it's going to be, everything is going to be smooth, and when suddenly the dark theme and muted colors come in, and they feel sort of like deceived, right?
Yes.
So
that was the whole point. That was what Jordan's was very clever. He had this idea in his head from the beginning he knew exactly that arc that the movie was going to take in terms of that tone. And he nailed that exactly right.
Wow. That's amazing. So let's rewind a little bit. So, when another person who is revealed as grandpa later, the one who is cutting wood and all, so he's coming running when Chris is out smoking, right? He's running, and there is a point where he makes a turn, and
Mm,
we see a glow of light coming in. We don't realize it the first
mm,
time, but then we realize that
mm,
there has been a light that has been turned on in a room where the
mm,
maid is actually looking at the
mm.
glass and like
That's
beautifying
right.
herself,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes, right.
I wanted to ask, like, I've noticed that the
Mm,
room in which the maid was standing was very soft
mm,
lit, right? So the lights were
mm,
soft and
mm,
all, but the same light, when it falls on Chris, it becomes hard. So were
mm,
there like two
mm,
different sources of lights used there?
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. Because even though we're saying in the story, we're saying the light is coming from that room, I think
Yeah,
with the laundry, where the maid was looking at herself in the glass.
right.
She turns the light on, and that light
Yeah,
comes out and hits Daniel, hits Walter.
yeah,
Walter's. We're saying it's the light from the room, but we're actually using. I think what I used for that light was something simple like a 2K Fresnel
wow.
old-fashioned light, and
Right, right,
that came out. It not sure if it was inside the window. It might have actually even been inside the room, and it's coming out of the window.
right.
And then when we shot that first, and then we turned around and we got Betty, Gabriel, who plays the maid. She came in and did her scene, looking in the glass, and then that was lit, still making the room look bright and
Yeah,
look like that's where the source came from. But that was a more of a bounce light. It bounced around the room and then we're bounced onto her. So
wow.
that was I will do that all the time. You'll just say, this is the sense of the light. This is the motivation for that light. But we're not going to use the same instruments necessarily
Right.
for there and for over here, because we're shooting at different times anyway.
Wow.
Sometimes you have to shoot it all together. So sometimes,
Hmm.
say if I was doing a long Steadicam shot that didn't, and we, light came on in a room and someone walked out, and then we spun around and we saw the actual room where the person came
Right.
out of. It was all no cut.
Hmm. Okay.
Then you have to combine the two things. Then you got to have the actual room lit up the way it
Yeah.
should be, but somehow that light's got to spill onto the hallway. So I might have another light that's hidden. That's actually the light hitting the hallway. And then when you turn around and look into the room, it's got the room lighting in there, but they're
Yeah.
actually two separate
And
lights,
it
but
is
it's supposed to
edited to make
feel
look,
like, but
yeah.
it feels like it's the
Right.
same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 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 So,
We do that all the time because of exposure is always different. And we
yeah.
always got to use those little tricks all the way.
Right. So, one thing, it's like one of my favorite scenes of the movie, like the favorite scene is the scene in Sunken Place, right?
Oh, of
So,
course.
the Sunken Place is something which felt like a very viscous liquid that we are
Mm,
stuck in and all. So, I
mm,
think the effect which amplified the scenes which amplified the effect were Chris's childhood background, and basically that was the only factor which amplified the Sunken
yeah,
Place, right? So how did you pull it off? Because mostly when
yeah.
we show struggle on camera, the camera is usually handheld because ultimately it gives a sense of disturbance and all. And when the camera goes down and we transition into
Mm,
another huge black place, how did you pull it
yes.
off with a smooth camera movement? Like, did you want
Oh,
to yeah.
yeah.
So,
Well, what we did when we had the little boy who's sitting watching
right,
the TV, which is his flashback to his childhood, the little boy was just sitting on our bed, and then we had just simply the movement of the dolly arm
right,
that's dropping down to black, but then in post, after we went to black, they did the transition through
right,
to the sunken place, which was shot also in black, but in a big, it was like a convention center, and we just had big black walls hanging
right,
around like a cube of black. And I had a bright light, like a 4K from above, shining down, like a
right.
hard light. I think it was a 4K M40 or 4K PAR. And Daniel was hanging on a wire.
Yeah,
But the wire couldn't move. He could only hang in one place.
right.
So to make it feel like he was falling, we moved the camera. So he
Wow.
could twist his position upward,
Right,
forwards, and backwards. But to
right.
have the sense that he was falling down, he
Wow.
was staying in one place and we'd move the camera past him. And
Yeah.
because it's on black, you can't see anything else. So it feels like he's falling towards the camera.
Oh,
So the
that is
camera
a
is just on a dolly arm with it rises
right.
and stuff, and a bit of dolly track.
So the
And then
screen through which like we see the screen, right? So what was that added in post or something, or was that some element?
yeah, so we shot that as a plate with Missy.
Okay, okay,
She's leaning into the screen.
yeah,
We shoot that as a plate separately, and then I had a light shining down onto Daniel, and then in post in VFX they got rid of the light and they put the screen in the same
wow,
position where the light was.
amazing, yeah,
And then they added, the only other thing they did in VFX was add little small particles
particles,
floating,
yeah, yeah, that's
little
what I was
particles
saying.
floating. And
Yeah,
then we shot Daniel, and we shot him at 200 frames a second on that Arri Alexa. And then had fans out of shot blowing air onto his clothes. So it looks like it's blowing in slow motion. It gives the sense that
right,
you're kind of underwater or
yeah,
in some kind of netherworld. So it's the combination of those elements, shooting in black, shooting in slow motion, having fans blowing him,
right,
having the light, and then replacing the light with the screen, and then VFX. And it was a combination of things, but it had to be done fairly cheap because
yeah,
there's a very low budget movie, and
yeah.
this was the very last day. We had to do it in one day, so it was all of those things couldn't be super expensive. We had to do a lot of it in camera.
Right. So did you
um,
have any alternative to that, feel of the sunken place? Like you showed it as some viscous liquid or underwater, you gave an underwater feel. So did you have an alternative to show a sunken place, or was that the final decision?
yeah, we had no alternative because we didn't have time to shoot any other
Yeah.
alternatives.
Okay, okay.
If for some reason it didn't work, or if later on Jordan changed his mind and didn't want it to be like that, then we maybe could have reshot the scene, in the much later on as a reshoot.
Oh,
And we did shoot some. We definitely shot some stuff that bled out, but not the sunken place. That was all done on that day.
wow.
What we did shoot later in the reshoot, which was months after the main shooting has finished, we shot a new ending and
Yeah.
a new beginning.
Wow.
So those things were, Jordan wasn't happy with either of those, and so
Yeah.
he wanted to change those two
You wanted to
parts.
change it.
So he wanted to
Amazing.
improve it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so did the studio. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
like it was a very knowledgeable, very productive conversation I had with you, sir. It was like
Thank you.
it's a very big honor for me that you came
Of
to
course.
talk to me and share your knowledge. And
Of
I
course.
hope there are a lot of people who are inspired by you. And my
Ah,
friends are like a big fans of you. You know, they were telling
that's
me to
great.
like contact
I'm
you
very,
again
very
and
happy to. I'm very
yeah,
happy to hear that, and I'm very
yeah.
happy to share some knowledge and
Yeah.
some of
So,
the
do you have
ideas.
any advice for any budding cinematographers who are like, obviously, the time is tough right now, financially
Mm.
and creatively. So, do you have any advice for this new budding
Mm.
cinematographers?
Well, it depends. I mean, I guess it gets to a point where you need to. Sometimes when you're starting out, it's important just to shoot as much stuff as you can. Even if it is tough because people don't want to pay, and you got to make a
Yeah.
living and all the rest of it. I mean, that's all the hard part. But the most important thing is to keep shooting. Just
Yeah.
keep experimenting and keep
Rolling. Yeah.
getting that experience. The thing about cinematography, you can't become a cinematographer overnight. I
Yeah.
think these days, maybe it is a bit faster because we've got the monitor and you can learn faster. You don't have to wait for the film to come back from the lab.
Right.
But but still, it takes, you've got to try different things. You've got to see what it looks like and lighting is something you learn through experience
Yeah.
and feeling. You have to put in emotion into it as well, and that's
True.
it takes time. And the best way to make use of your time is just keep doing it.
Wow, that is like very inspirational set of words
Of
from you, sir.
course.
And it was a very big honor again talking to you.
Of
And
course,
I hope
pleasure.
we conduct a podcast very soon for next time your movie comes out. And it
Yes.
would be a very
Well, I'm
big
happy to
honor.
talk to you. Happy to talk to you again, Sharad. So do you
Thanks a
want
lot.
to contact me again when I have another movie that you want to
Yeah.
talk about?
Definitely, sir. I'll be honored to. If I come to Australia, I'll definitely meet you.
Of course. Okay. No problem at
Of
all.
course, sir.
Oh,
Thanks a
great to
lot.
talk to you.
Nice,
Okay.
likewise, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.